Hello, and welcome to Decarbonize, the clean energy podcast from Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is a Minnesota nonprofit working to speed our state's transition to a clean energy economy. My name is Jo Olson. I do communications here at Fresh Energy, and I'm with you today to share a recording of our recent webinar called Going Beyond Cars, Advancing Minnesota's Vehicle Electrification for Climate, Health, and Economy. Fresh Energy hosted this event with guests from Sierra Club, Event 350, and ERM Group. And with that, I'll begin the recording. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining Fresh Energy and our partners today for this webinar. My name is Brianna Kerber. My friends and colleagues call me Bree. I use she, her pronouns, and I am Fresh Energy's Policy Communications Associate. Today, we've brought together a group of experts and advocates to give you the inside scoop on what's next for Minnesota in our transition to a clean transportation future. And in particular, we will be discussing the ins and outs of how Minnesota can work to electrify its medium and heavy duty vehicles. And we're all here today because we know that electrifying medium and heavy duty vehicles is good for climate, for public health, and for the economy. And we've got the data to back it up, thanks to a new report from Fresh Energy on behalf of the Coalition for Clean Transportation. And we have a fantastic crew of folks here today ready to talk in detail with everyone about the report's findings and implications. And then we will end the hour with time for a Q&A session. So if you have questions that come up throughout our conversation, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box that you can see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we will do our best to answer those when we get to that portion of the hour. In my opinion, the best part about the Q&A box is that if you see someone else pose a question that you really like or were also curious about, you can upvote that question so that we can see it's a popular one and make sure to dedicate some time to addressing it. And I think before we get started, let's kick off a round of introductions so everyone can meet our panelists. Anjali, would you like to start us off?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Anjali Baines, she, her pronouns. I'm the lead director of energy access and equity here at Fresh Energy. And I will pass it over to Dave.
Great. Thank you, Anjali. I'm Dave Siemens. I use he, him pronouns, and I am with ERM Group. I am a principal consultant working on transportation-based projects in the light duty as well as the medium and heavy duty space related to electrification and low carbon fuels. And I will pass it on to Ellen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ellen Robo. I use she, her pronouns. I work with Dave Siemens at ERM Group and conducted analysis around Minnesota's medium heavy duty electrification. And I'll pass it to Joshua.
Hello, my name is Joshua Hodak. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a senior program manager on land use and transportation for the Sierra Club Minnesota North Star chapter, which is, of course, part of Sierra Club National, the oldest and largest grassroots environmental advocacy organization in the US. And welcome, and I'll kick it to Maddie.
Thank you. Maddie, I use she, her pronouns. I'm a community organizer with Minnesota 350, focusing on clean transportation. I lead a team of community members passionate about making a difference in large vehicle emissions and looking forward to creative ways to create a worker-led Minnesota green economy that stabilizes our climate and gets us some clean air, especially to overburdened communities. Thanks so much. Pass it back to you, Bree.
Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing a bit about yourselves. I'm going to share my screen again really quickly here. And then Anjali, you are going to start from the top and give us a super brief overview of why this report is important and maybe some details on what exactly it covers before we hear from our experts at ERM.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much. And thank you, Bree, for bringing us all together and facilitating today. And thank you for everyone for being here. So just to kick things off, I want to set the stage on why we did this report and what it covers. This report is really looking at the benefits from a climate, health, and economic perspective of electrifying our buses, trucks, delivery vans, everything in between. It's meant to be a foundational reference for advocates and decision makers when it comes to medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification. And we actually had a similar report done in 2018 that showcased the benefits of electrifying our passenger cars. And that really helped launch a slate of utility efforts to support EVs, and then regulatory actions like Clean Cars Minnesota that was focused on reducing the tailpipe emissions from our passenger vehicles. So we're hoping that this report gives us the same shared understanding of how electrifying our medium and heavy duty vehicles can benefit us all, so that we can move ahead and start planning for that transition. This report goes through a few scenarios for adoption of these vehicles. The first is business as usual, to our best ability, forecasting what would happen without any sort of investment or policy interventions. The second scenario is if Minnesota were to join the non-binding medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle memorandum of understanding, which 16 states and DC and then the Canadian province of Quebec have all joined. And it really ask states to commit to a goal of having 30% of their zero emission vehicles, or 30% of their medium heavy duty vehicle sales being zero emission by 2030, with 100% by 2050. The other scenarios we chose were the advanced clean trucks, a regulation that a few states have now adopted and really represent the best, most stringent regulation that currently exists to regulate emissions, both general pollution and greenhouse gases from our trucks. And then our last scenario was really an aspirational scenario that says, outside of any specific policy or commitments that exist, the MOU and the advanced clean trucks exist. They're out there. Some states are doing it. So it really is an example of concrete examples of what adoption curves could look like. Beyond that, if we were to do a number of policies ourselves and we could get almost 100% of our medium and heavy duty vehicles to be zero emission by 2050, what could those benefits be? So it's really that best case scenario. So those are our scenarios. And then next slide, just to make sure we have a shared understanding of what I mean by medium heavy duty vehicles. Trucks and bigger vehicles generally have quite a few classes. As you can see here, you have everything from your delivery vans in the lower classes to your smaller, more regional focus freight delivery in the middle classes, and then your buses, and then finally your semi trucks. So really, unlike passenger vehicles, it really encompasses a huge number of different bigger vehicles. So I just want to make that clear. We'll be talking about things like average, medium heavy duty vehicles, and just want to be clear that it's an even broader array and category of vehicles than when we talk about passenger vehicles. And with that, I will hand it over to Bree.
Forgot to unmute myself there. I'm still learning about Zoom all these years later. It seems like I should know how to unmute myself by now, but thanks for bearing with me. Now we're going to hear from Dave at ERM in detail about the report. So I'll stop sharing my screen and give Dave a chance to share his.
All right. Thank you, Bree. So let me share my screen. All right. So appreciate everyone joining the call today. And so we're going to go over the results as Anjali mentioned. So let's get started. So first, I want to talk about what our modeling framework looks at. So we have a number of inputs that you see over to the left side of the screen, including EV sales and in-use trajectories, along with tailpipe and upstream emissions, the light duty and medium and heavy duty charging inputs, state vehicle populations, as well as vehicle and maintenance costs, and finally, state grid mix and electricity costs. All of this information gets put into our benefit cost analysis framework, and then it outputs these buckets you see over to the right side. So the first one being fuel use and emissions, which really we're looking at the change in diesel and gasoline over to a more electrified fleet. And this includes both tailpipe as well as upstream emissions. And we also monetize those emission savings. Also, we look at the health impacts. So the changes in NOx and PM emissions and how that would affect premature death, as well as hospital visits, lost work days. And we also monetize those benefits as well. On the economic side, we are looking at what kind of changes in vehicle spending purchase, fuel and maintenance would happen from a more electrified fleet, and what sort of charging infrastructure investments would be necessary to meet those levels of penetration. On the utility impact side, we're looking at the change in electricity use and load, as well as what sort of revenue would be associated with this level of electrification. And then finally, any sort of impact on electricity rates associated with that. And as I mentioned, for the infrastructure investments, what sort of gaps are there within the state currently, and how can we, and what sort of chargers would be necessary to fill those gaps to meet this level of electrification? So I'll go on to the next slide. So Anjali gave a great overview of what the different classes were of vehicles within Minnesota. And this just provides a little bit of context of what those vehicles actually mean within the state. And so you'll see that the majority of the vehicles are those heavy duty pickups and vans, which we call Class 2B. And we've provided some pictures just for context. They're really the heavy duty pickups and vans that you would see, the vans for delivery, your last mile delivery, the Amazon pickup truck, the pickups, vans. But then that gets into your larger vehicles, such as the freight and vocational trucks, the Class 3 to 8, which make up the secondary largest portion of the medium and heavy duty fleet. And these are your box trucks and your refuse vehicles, the concrete mixers, the utility trucks that you see here. The next one being the tractor trailer trucks. These are much more regional. They do a lot more mileage, and these are the largest of the vehicles, being Class 7 and 8. And then finally, buses as well, which are much larger as well. And they have much more fixed routes, but also, they have much more varied use within the state. And that makes up what the fleet that we're looking at and the benefits would be associated with these vehicle types. So next, as Anjali mentioned, we looked at a few different scenarios. The first being that ACT rule. The second being the medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU rule, ZEV MOU goal. And then finally, that aspirational scenario. And so these charts show the percent of new vehicle sales. So as you can see in the ACT rule, you see by that 2033 timeframe, your combination trucks reach about 40% sales. Your bus single unit and Class 2B vehicles reach higher percentages in different timeframes. Under that medium ZEV MOU case, you'll see that we've reached that 30% by the 2030 timeframe, and then we assume over time that would reach 100% sales as you approach 2050. And then finally, under the aspirational scenario, these quickly rise in sales, and all vehicle types reach 100% by that 2040 timeframe. And so these underlying sales get input into our model, and it looks at how this would affect the population of vehicles. So next, I'll show you how that would affect. So in the top one, this is our baseline case, and it's very hard to see, but there is a dark blue line at the bottom of this chart, but we've also provided what's that percentage of in use. So 0.6% of in use in that baseline condition would actually be EVs. Under the ACT scenario, this increases and we get to about 58% of in-use vehicles would be EVs under that ACT scenario. This rises to 74% under the medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU by 2050. And then finally, under our aspirational scenario, you'll see that we not only have EVs, but we've also added in some fuel cell electric vehicles as well to ramp up to 2050. So by 2050, you're seeing 96% of in-use vehicles being either EV or fuel cell. Just to provide a little bit more background, we've also looked at how the grid affects emissions for these vehicles when they charge. So we've looked at two different grid scenarios. The first being a business as usual grid, which we've used for our baseline or business as usual scenario, the ACT rule scenario, as well as the medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU scenario. And for our aspirational, considering this is a much more aspirational scenario, we've looked at a decarbonized grid that gets to 100% clean energy by 2040. So these are the grid scenarios that will be used to actually project what the emissions associated with those electric vehicles charging would be. And so looking at some of the benefits of these different scenarios, starting with the climate. First, you'll see this gray line in the chart to the left. This is our baseline scenario. See that you do see a slight decline over time, and this is due to changes in vehicle technology. But these scenarios still provide significant reductions over and above that baseline. So that HCT scenario gets about 33% reduction, the medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU 48%, but that aspirational gets 83% reduction in GHGs. And so cumulatively, we have about 40 million metric tons under the ACT, 50 under the medium and heavy duty ZEV, and then 91 million metric tons of CO2e in the aspirational. And we've also monetized these, so $3.1 to $7.2 billion, depending on the scenario. Taking this one step further, we also looked at the health benefits related to NOx and PM emissions. Again, you'll see those gray lines for both NOx and PM, and then our scenarios underneath those. So the baseline, still you'll see some change in emissions due to technology of the vehicles shifting over time to more advanced vehicles, but still these scenarios, when you electrify, give you much more significant reductions. I will note that we've also looked at the cumulative reduced incidences for reduced mortality, hospital visits, and minor cases. And you'll see that these scenarios provide significant reduced incidences, related to the ACT, the MOU, and the aspirational scenarios. And we've also done a calculation of what that monetized value would be. So up to about $2.5 billion could be realized under that aspirational scenario, due to reductions in NOx and PM emissions. Next, just to touch upon when we project ZEV internal combustion engine cost parity would take place. So this chart over to the left looks at all of the different costs and all of the different benefits associated with purchasing the average new medium and heavy duty vehicle. So see at the bottom, we have MY 2025, MY 2030, 2035, and 24. This represents model year of the vehicle. So if you purchased a model year 2025 vehicle, you would see that you would have a pretty high incremental vehicle purchase price, which means the price of your ZEV would be higher than, say, a diesel or a gasoline vehicle. You would also have the purchase of your charger, as well as some maintenance or inspection of that charger, just to make sure it's in operating condition. But then under the zero line, these negative values represent what you would save. So you would save in net fuel costs because electricity is cheaper than diesel fuel and gasoline. And you would also save in vehicle maintenance, because these ZEV vehicles have much less, they're less complex. They have fewer moving parts. They don't require oil changes. So you would actually see a savings for those vehicles. And so we've summed all of these costs and reductions together to get this net life cycle cost that you'll see as this red diamond. So you see in model year 2025, if you purchased a vehicle, the average owner would pay about $19,700 in additional incremental cost, basically. But as you move to 2030 and beyond, you see a savings associated with those vehicles due to the high net fuel cost savings and incremental vehicle cost savings, which outweigh the purchase costs and the charger costs for those vehicles. So by model year 2040, if you purchase that vehicle, over the life of that vehicle, you would save over $20,000, over $22,000 over the life of that vehicle. And I'll note that for this calculation, we've assumed a 21-year life for these vehicles, and we've discounted maintenance and fuel costs by 4% to get that overall value. Looking at infrastructure for these vehicles, we looked at where these vehicles would charge. And so you'll see to the table over to the right side, you'll see we've looked at the different charging port locations. So we have depot-based chargers. We have public DC fast chargers in 150 kilowatt and 500 kilowatt chargers. And you'll see that under the different scenarios, we have varying levels of public charging ports as well as depot charging ports. And over to the left side, this chart actually calculates what the costs would be associated with those chargers. So under the ACT, about $197 million in that 2050 timeframe. Under that ZEV MOU, this rises to about 358 million. And then in the aspirational scenario, we see about 371 million. And there's different varying pieces that make up this total, including installation, purchase, and maintenance of those chargers, which also includes inspection to make sure that they're operating correctly. Next, wanted to talk about the utility impact of these different scenarios. First, I'll start with the top right chart, which looks at what's the incremental peak load associated with these vehicles. And so under that ACT scenario, we see about 2,300 megawatts of increased load due to these vehicles charging on the grid, while the ZEB MOU reaches about 3,300 megawatts, and then the aspirational reaches about 3,800 megawatts in that 2050 timeframe. Looking at this chart over to the left side, there's a few different elements. We have the utility revenue, which is shown in dark blue. That's associated with the vehicle charging. The incremental capacity cost, which is shown in orange, and then the generation and transmission costs shown in red. So red represents the generation and transmission costs of base electricity to provide to their customers. And this orange line represents the incremental capacity costs that's associated with added load to the grid. And so you'll see that in the earlier years, 2030 and 2040, these actually provide the numbers up above, which represent the net utility revenue that would be associated with that scenario. But by 2050, many of these scenarios represent a negative net revenue due to the incremental capacity cost outweighing the revenue that would be associated with that scenario. I will say that this analysis is only looking at current utility policy. It's not looking at future policy and how this would affect things. So this could be construed as, in Minnesota, there would have to be some changes to the utility policy to make this flip, so that by 2050, the utility would not see a negative net revenue. And this is going to require, utilities to actually think about how they want to position themselves, as well as the utility costs and pricing they want to give their customers, so that they actually are seeing utility revenue. And I will also just mention for this that the majority of the reasoning behind these negative costs in the outer years is due to the large population of combination trucks within Minnesota. Those combination trucks need very high energy chargers to actually charge those vehicles, and that demand is what's driving these capacity costs you see in the orange. So if we could, add battery storage to chargers or other methods to actually reduce the demand of those vehicles, then these costs would actually come down, and you would see positive results. All right. So we've talked a lot about the different benefits and how things could change over time based on these different scenarios. This just rolls everything up into a net societal cost or benefit associated with the different scenarios. So you'll see that under the different scenarios, there are this red line for net utility revenue, which is negative, but everything else is positive past 2040 and 2050. So under the ACT scenario, we're seeing about just over $1 billion in annual net benefits. That ZEB MOU scenario is almost 1.5 billion. And then under the aspirational, it's over 2.1 billion, almost $2.2 billion in annual benefits associated with that scenario. And I went through things very quickly, but that is all the slides we have. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. But with that, I will pass it back to Anjali.
Thank you, Dave. That was great. So many good details. Oh, actually, and then Bree, is there a previous slide, or is that the first slide? Okay, no, that is the first slide. Okay, great. So that was a really good amount of detail that Dave shared, and I will say the report that we'll share after this includes all those details and more, even more context and sort of the data sources and how the analysis played out for those of you who would like to take a closer look afterwards. But I think it's pretty clear that the main takeaways are that electrifying our buses and trucks and delivering vans and everything in between offer clear climate and health benefits now, and that there are already economic benefits for smaller class of vehicles that will spread to the bigger classes of vehicles as we get closer to cost parity throughout this decade. Now, that might seem like a while away, but given the lifetime of medium heavy-duty vehicles, up to or even beyond 20 years, to actually realize all these benefits we've been outlining, we need to start planning and supporting that transition for electric and medium heavy-duty vehicles now. So that's really our motivation here, as I mentioned at the beginning, which is to use this analysis to spur action by decision makers to make sure that the groundwork is laid or the road paved, if I may, to support a relatively more rapid update and uptake of electric trucks and buses and commercial vehicles. And a rapid uptake that is really necessitated by the latest climate science and public health analysis out there. Luckily, there are a few things happening around the US that shows what this sort of action can look like and how it can be taken. I wanted to go over that quickly before I hand it over to my fellow panelists to talk a little bit more about what Minnesota can do specifically. So at the federal level, the Biden administration earlier this month actually announced that they are going to be doing a series of regulation of rules on advancing or reducing emissions from trucks. And they're calling these the clean truck plans, and it really has a few aspects to it, but their main goals are to reduce both smog forming pollutants that harm human health, and as well as reducing greenhouse gases from these medium and heavy duty trucks. The first part of that plan is to update existing NOx and greenhouse gas rules for heavy duty vehicles. They actually have submitted that proposed rule earlier this week, I think, or at the end of this week, they'll be submitting that proposed rule. And that is really meant to update the tailpipe emission standards for these heavy duty trucks from model year 2027 through model year 2029. They will then be looking at how do we update the greenhouse gas standards for these heavy duty vehicles for model year 2030 and beyond. And then in between there, also figuring out how to set stronger tailpipe standards for medium duty commercial vehicles. So they're really trying to take a multi-pronged approach to reducing pollution, both air and climate, from our medium and heavy duty vehicles. These are really great first steps. They're not quite at the level of where our strictest standards in the US are that have been advanced by states like California, but it's definitely a really good step and a way to support the transition to electric medium and heavy duty vehicles. The second thing that happened actually just last week that's really well timed is NESCOM, or the Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management, who is coordinating that non-binding medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle memorandum of understanding we mentioned that one of our scenarios is based on. That coordinating group actually released their draft action plan for how the states are participating in that MOU can advance towards those goals I mentioned, which is 30% of all sales of medium and heavy duty vehicles being zero emission by 2030, 100% by 2050. I put a screenshot of the table of contents here just to show how robust it is. It really dives into every single sector and what action can be taken from the state, local level to utility levels to even the commercial and private industry level. So that will be a really great resource that we'll be sure to share out after this. Just some examples of what's in that report. It really outlines that states and local jurisdictions can take leadership in setting commitments to electrify their own fleets, both the passenger vehicles and the medium and heavy duty vehicle fleets, and really set the way for how other fleets can transition to. And also calls out the need to make sure there's more interregional planning, interstate planning for EV charging to support these medium and heavy duty vehicles, especially when we talk about the freight and the vehicles are crossing state bounds. It'll be really important to make sure that EV charging initiatives are coordinated. And then finally, next slide. Another slide. There you go. That was the first slide I was looking for, but this is the next slide we can use here. Finally, as most folks are probably aware, the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed last fall has a lot of funding for electric vehicles, both on the charging and the bus side. And that EV charging, there's about $68 million that's coming to Minnesota. That doesn't include another $2.5 billion that'll be competitively available for all states to apply to. This is focused on building out, some of our light duty vehicle charging, of course, but there will be opportunities to support heavy duty vehicle charging, a part of this, especially shared charging infrastructure for heavy duty vehicles. So that just represents another existing pot of money that we can use to start thinking about supporting charging infrastructure for these vehicles. And then, of course, there's a lot of money out there for electric transit buses and electric school buses. We've been given $818 million to the state to work on transit in general, and part of that money will be able to be used towards electric buses. There's also 2.5 billion competitive grants available for electric transit buses, and another 2.5 billion available for electric school buses that our state and different jurisdictions can apply for. So another really just exciting example of things are coming down from the federal level that can support Minnesota in its own journey in setting the stage for electric medium heavy duty vehicles. And with that, I will hand it back to Bree.
Yes, thanks, Anjali, for sharing all of those details with us. And now I think we're going to hear from Joshua about Sierra Club's take on the report and what it might mean for Minnesota from the Sierra Club perspective.
Thanks, Bree. Sierra Club is, of course, part of the Coalition for Clean Transportation. And collectively, we're a broad team of Minnesotan clean energy, environmental, and social advocacy groups, social justice advocacy groups, working for a better future in our transportation sector. Transportation, of course, is the leading contributor to climate change pollution right now in Minnesota. So together we're advancing solutions, and electrification is a big part of it. So we're already chipping away at this business as usual scenario in working with our major transit providers across the state in investing in electric and zero emission fleets. So some progress is happening. Agencies are making robust and impressive plans to transition their fleets, piloting a variety of different vehicles in our cold weather state, and learning that they do in fact work, and this technology is adaptable in Minnesota. So with the historic federal funding in the pipeline that Anjali just talked about, we need to leverage those federal dollars at the state level as well to help assist agencies, organizations, and companies adapt and get these vehicles on the road sooner rather than later. So we're talking about transit and school buses that have plans already, and we'll talk about that. And then upgrading and installing charging infrastructure and bringing these plans to fruition. So next slide. Just a couple weeks ago, the largest transit provider in the state of Minnesota, of course, is Metro Transit in the Twin Cities. And Metro Transit came out with their zero emission bus transition plan, which lays the groundwork for building on what they've learned through their pilot New Flyer buses that are on the road now, servicing some bus rapid transit lines, and building on that pilot program and putting more electric buses out on the road, serving people that are most impacted by traffic pollution in the urban core. So next slide, some details on milestones that are conservative, but very well thought out and planned in our opinion. Some milestones of vehicle procurement of zero emission battery electric buses are laid out in this plan that just got transmitted to the state legislature, and the state legislature had a full hearing on this in the House Transportation Committee, putting 40-foot buses that are deemed to better serve the community and perform more effectively than some of the 60-foot articulated buses that's pictured here that were in the first pilot program. Next slide. So where it's even colder in our state, up in Duluth, Minnesota, is another example. Duluth Transit Authority came out with their Better Bus Blueprint, which also has been piloting some Proterra full battery electric buses. And next slide shows one of those buses that are actually in service, and the cost savings that are just increasing as diesel fuel prices go up as we speak in this current market that we wanted to highlight. With that, I will kick it to my colleague, Maddie, to talk more about what's happening in the state right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joshua. Essentially, as y'all have just highlighted, we're seeing so many opportunities coalesce at the state and federal level right now. And I'm looking forward to highlighting two ways we can build on momentum immediately. In addition to the climate stabilizing and air quality benefits that my fellow panelists have gone over, this policy, the MOU or the other models that we looked at, is really about good, healthy jobs for Minnesotans. If we're proactive about tackling large vehicle electrification in order to increase green union jobs, support local manufacturing, and strengthen Minnesota businesses, we're really going to see a wide array of benefits in addition to the climate and health benefits. So right now, Minnesota is actually manufacturing large electric vehicles, but we are not benefiting from their use. So large vehicle manufacturing of electric vehicles provides over 1,000 jobs, but Minnesotans aren't actually getting the benefit of these vehicles on the road. So New Flyer has a St. Cloud and a Crookston facility, and they're producing electric buses, providing hundreds of union jobs. And they actually have the potential to add hundreds more jobs this year if e-bus production increases. Zeus Electric Chassis in White Bear Lake is another model of a really innovative local leader. And what they are producing is the 4 through 6 or work truck vehicles. However, both of these companies produce these electric vehicles and then ship them to other states. And I've heard from both of them that most of the other states they're shipping these vehicles to are vehicles that have signed the MOU MHD. So by taking steps towards large vehicle electrification, we can make sure Minnesotans are getting the climate and air benefits, as well as the maintenance and fueling cost savings that are happening because of the vehicles being produced here already. Additionally, bus drivers and truck drivers are some of the people that are most going to benefit from us cleaning up these fuel types. Kids too will benefit. The cumulative impact on kids' lungs and brains has lifelong effects. And I think one of the biggest opportunities where we can take action this year is electric school buses. So while electric school buses aren't the vast majority of these vehicles that we're talking about, there are a lot of reasons why we can electrify this area this year. A few of the reasons we would want to do that are we can actually see that exposure to diesel, to dirty diesel, impacts kids' performance at school. A study of 750,000 children in Georgia showed higher academic test scores for students that were on cleaner buses. And the University of Michigan showed better lung function and also 8% lower absenteeism for children riding in cleaner school buses. And it's really important to mention, this disproportionately impacts communities of color, which often have more vehicles, busier roads. So asthma-related hospitalizations in Minnesota are 3.6 times higher among Black children than among white children. We need to electrify our school buses to give all our kids a chance at a healthy life. And that's part of the reason why we want to position ourselves now to electrify this sector. So between the federal government money, the $5 billion to clean up school buses, the World Resources Institute money, and the Volkswagen settlement. There's a lot of opportunities right now for Minnesota schools to transition their fleets. So when the MPCA opened up their grant period for the school bus pilot, they got 41 applicants for electric school buses, or people applied for 41 buses, but we distributed funding to 8. So this shows that awareness is already shifting around this, but not quickly enough. So the process right now is a little bit piecemeal. If we are able to set statewide goals on this area, whether it's the MOU or advancing on the individual policies, like NESCOM outlined in their action plan, we are positioned to make some really big benefits. The process for applying to a lot of those grants for electric school buses is complicated. And so it's challenging for under-resourced communities, including tribal, environmental justice, and low-income communities to apply. And that's on top of communities of color being 3 times more likely to be exposed to unsafe levels of air pollution. So this is why we really need to be proactive about creating a transition plan, both around electric school buses specifically, and more broadly on the medium and heavy duty vehicles that we have the opportunity to electrify most quickly. From San Diego to Quebec, cities all around the continent are already electrifying their bus fleets. We should look to Virginia, who has more school buses than Minnesota, but has committed to electrify all 17,000. So this is why the findings of this report and having specifics about these are the cost, health, and climate benefits that we could get as a state if we actually start to plan the transition now. This is why this information is so important, especially coming off lots of funding opportunities and the state's climate action plan, as well as this NESCOM action plan. So it's really well timed, but it's going to take work to actually write the next chapter of the Minnesota economy. And that means developing goals and a strategy around how we tackle emission reduction from large vehicles. And that is why the one thing that I'll just give a quick shout out about on March 31st, we're having a School Bus 101, Electric School Bus 101 meeting, which I think you'll hear about a little bit later. But that's why this report is so well timed, and yeah, excited for our state to take action on advancing some of these policies. Thanks.
Thanks, Maddie, so much for walking us through those details. Very important information for all of us to have. And now I think we would love to transition to our Q&A, but first I want to give each of our panelists a chance to talk about any upcoming events or action opportunities that would allow folks listening to act to secure a cleaner, healthier state now and for the future. So Joshua, I know you might have some information about a special day honoring transit workers tomorrow. I don't know if you want to talk about that quickly, and then we can pass it over to other folks.
Yeah, tomorrow is Transit Driver Appreciation Day, and this is a national day of recognition for all transit drivers across the country. You know, one way that we can demonstrate that we appreciate frontline workers that are getting people to work and to the doctor and everywhere else that they, the grocery store and everywhere else they need to go, is to demonstrate that we're also committing to clean up the vehicles that they drive every day. So just wanted to put that on everyone's calendar. If you do use transit, or encourage you to try transit, thank your driver tomorrow, and it's a great way to amplify the fact that we need to clean up the fleets that these operators drive in our neighborhoods every day.
Awesome. Thank you, Joshua. And Maddie, you mentioned that event. You want to tell us anything more about it quickly?
Yeah, thank you. Essentially, we have several big pots of money at the state and federal level right now to get electric school buses on Minnesota roads. But it requires a lot of intention, especially with the current driver shortage, and also especially with the federal money being really complex to apply for. So my team of community members is hosting an Electric School Buses 101. It's outlining the steps we can take together to support Minnesota schools, especially those most overburdened by air pollution, to take advantage of this transition. I encourage y'all to come and to share if you're able. It's, like I said here, or like is here, Thursday, March 31st. It's going to be 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. over Zoom. Hope to see you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Maddie, for sharing about that event. And then here at Fresh Energy, I know we've got a couple things to mention. First of all, we are encouraging everyone to take action for electric buses, clean transportation, and infrastructure. So we have an easy online tool that allows you to really quickly tell your legislators to set aside money from Minnesota's budget surplus to ensure that we can take full advantage of the federal grant dollars in the bipartisan infrastructure law. So if you would like more information on that, you can head to fresh-energy.org/take-action. And that's sort of a long URL. So that is up on the screen if you would like to take action on that front. And then Anjali, would you want to share with our audience about the next action step on their screen?
Sure, definitely. And I think we can send out a follow-up email with some of these links on to make it easier for folks. The other thing I just want to draw attention to, we're talking about Minnesota's taking steps or things happening here, but there hasn't necessarily been this holistic plan of how to address electrifying medium and heavy duty vehicles as other states have done it. There is an opportunity to provide that input and participate generally in a little bit more of a big planning session that's happening by the state right now. And that's the Minnesota Climate Action Framework that is currently up on the website for Minnesota. And there's different sections, and there's one whole section dedicated to clean transportation. And they've made it very engaging and easy for the public to read along, see what's in there, and then provide input. There's a survey in this link that we'll share out afterwards. So it's really encourage folks on this to take some time, participate, in this process, in the state planning process, because this is one of the ways we can make sure that our voices are heard in this planning for the future.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, Anjali. Now it looks like we have 10 to 12 minutes for audience questions. And since I don't see any in the Q&A just yet, I know I have a couple. So Dave, you had talked about some of the utility scale information related to this, but Anjali, I'm curious, maybe you can talk a bit about how and what in more detail utilities can do to support this transition as it continues to unfold.
Yeah, definitely. So utilities have a really clear role in playing to play in terms of making sure that the public charging infrastructure, the basically what's called a make-ready infrastructure, is out there and ready to be used for both light-duty vehicles, but in this case also for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. So make-ready usually refers to sort of all the lines and electrical work that needs to happen to connect that charging station to the electric grid without actually installing the charger itself. So it's really important work that is sort of unseen by the public generally, but is really vital to making sure that there is truly a foundation in this case for public charging or just medium heavy duty vehicle charging in the state. And in the past, we've worked through dockets at the Public Utilities Commission here in Minnesota to support or guide the utilities, the major utilities in the state to do that action. We've had success on the light duty vehicle side, as well as encouraging, supporting utilities to take action on a fleet pilot that's supporting transit agencies. But we really want to make sure that utilities are engaging and thinking beyond buses and showing the same sort of planning that they've done for light duty vehicles for all types of medium and heavy duty vehicles, particularly when it comes to charging infrastructure investments and planning that will be needed to support a beneficial integration of these larger vehicles onto our electric grid.
Awesome, thank you. And I do see a couple questions in the Q&A. I've got one for Dave and one for Maddie so far. Dave, I have a question for you from William. And William is asking regarding the information on slide 9. So I'll give you a second to pull that back up if you need to. What assumptions are underlying the significant decline in vehicle purchase costs between model years 2025 and 2030 vehicles?
Sure, happy to answer that. So the majority of the decline in incremental costs is related to battery technology. as you've seen in the light duty space, the cost of light duty batteries have declined significantly in the last 5 years, 6 or 7 years even. And this is projected to decline even further as we move to 2025 and 2030. And a lot of those benefits that you're seeing from the light duty space are going to spill over into the medium and heavy duty space. And those costs for batteries are going to decline. And so the majority of those cost savings is what you see in the difference between 2025 and 2030 is those battery costs are declining very rapidly. And the cost of the vehicles are coming down because of those battery costs. Hopefully that answers your question.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. And Maddie, I've got a question here for you from Stephen. And Stephen is asking, can you give some of the details that complicates the application and receiving of federal funding for e-school buses, for electric school buses?
Yeah, happy to. So the EPA, which is going to be distributing the funds for the electric school buses, is trying to roll out the applications as quickly as possible. And that has ended up meaning that the process is really burdensome for schools. So the process as we understand it today is that the school district is responsible for getting the estimate of the cost of the bus or buses, charging infrastructure, and any necessary upgrades to utilities. And the school then applies to the US EPA for a rebate. After confirmation of approval, the school has to spend all its own money, and then the EPA sends a rebate down the line. Now, the EPA is saying that priority applications will be from tribal schools, rural schools, environmental justice areas, and a couple other kind of higher need criteria. However, underfunded schools are not likely to have, say, hundreds of thousands of dollars that they can spend out of their own budget, as well as just the time intensity of doing all this research and building all these relationships. So that's why my team is looking at, how can we partner with all these different state agencies? How can we partner with the legislature and use the budget surplus well? How can we actually create a path for underfunded schools to get these buses, even though the application process is almost set up so that the schools that most need these buses are going to have the hardest time getting them. So those are some of the gaps and challenges that we're hoping we can address and partner around to make sure that Minnesotans are able to take advantage of the clean air and climate benefits from this transition. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Maddie. And since I don't see any other questions in the Q&A, I guess maybe we can do kind of an open question to our panelists. If there's any final thoughts you'd like to share or anything else you'd like to add before we kind of end our hour here, I'll give you guys the floor again if there's anything you'd like to add.
I guess I'll just add one thing on that last question is just in the report in our appendix, we provide some more detail on the cost parity for different vehicle types. And so that would just provide a little bit more context for, say a class 2B vehicle versus a combination truck. A class 2B vehicle, which is very similar to a light duty vehicle, is going to have cost parity way earlier than say a combination truck, which is going to be much longer period of time just because of the size of the battery that's necessary for it to haul all of those heavy loads. So hopefully that report will provide some additional detail that's helpful to understand how that transition is going to change from say a diesel or gasoline vehicle to that electrified version, and kind of what that time frame that we're currently projecting when that cost parity will take place.
Great, thanks, Dave. Well, everyone, unless there's anything from our panelists to add, Anjali, did I see you unmute?
You did. Thank you, Dave, for mentioning that. I think I'll also take the opportunity about the cost. This report was done before we're seeing the current fossil fuel volatility in the market, and even there's a whole section on the fossil fuel prices or the liquid fuel prices that are included, and it's using long-term projections that don't account for the current increases, especially in diesel that we're seeing right now. So we didn't really get a touch on this, but investing in electric vehicles, especially medium and heavy duty vehicles, especially when you're talking diesel, can really offer an opportunity to have a little more energy independence and be protected by this future volatility. And if we keep seeing these higher prices over the coming years, that will actually make the kind of cost argument even more attractive for these vehicles. So just wanted to mention that our report actually does not include the current trends upwards in these fuel prices. And the final thing I'll note is we didn't even get we didn't touch on everything that Minnesota State has done. Their efforts around the Volkswagen funding has really been a great example of sort of how we can think about strategically deploying funds when it comes to electrifying bigger vehicles, because they had funds and grant programs in there to support electric trucks and buses and charging. There's also a regional electric vehicle Midwest memorandum of understanding that Minnesota signed on alongside Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin that includes a specific ask to support acceleration of medium and heavy duty fleet electrification. And those are just examples of things that have happened by the state. But I think, as Maddie really eloquently noted, we need to be thinking really big picture holistically about how we're tackling this industry, because it's so important from a climate perspective, from a public health perspective, and from an equity perspective, as she mentioned.
Awesome. Thanks, Anjali. And I did just see one more question in the Q&A from, looks like Lee. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Lee. Regarding the challenges for underfunded schools, have you considered going to organizations that handle administration for school districts? Example would be South Central Service Cooperative in North Mankato. I don't know, maybe Maddie, that one might have been for you, or someone else can chime in.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I would say that the EPA had been scheduled to release their education and outreach plan Wednesday this week, and they delayed it. They announced that they're delaying it. And so the whole application process is going to be delayed by a few weeks. And so, my team is really looking at where are the gaps going to be in that plan? What does, say the MPCA plan to do to reach out to schools, especially applicants that applied for the previous grant funding. So there's a little bit of, we want to see what the plan is to really know where the gaps are, but I think what you just named is a really good suggestion, and I made a note of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I think that brings our event to a close. Special thank you to each of our panelists for sitting down to talk with us today. And thank you especially to the folks who submitted questions. We always appreciate getting to answer your questions live. If we weren't able to answer your question, if you didn't drop it into the Q&A, please feel free to reach out to me about it at Kerber, that's Kerber, at fresh-energy.org, and I can direct your question to the correct panelist. If you missed part of the conversation today or would like to share it, a recording will be available shortly. So everyone who registered for the event will get an email in the coming days with a link to the recording and then links to any resources that were mentioned, especially including that report. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in to the audio recording of our webinar. You can stay up to date on Fresh Energy's work at fresh-energy.org or follow us on social media. Thank you everyone for listening and subscribing to our podcast. You can support Fresh Energy's work by making a donation today. Visit our website at fresh-energy.org and click Donate in the upper right corner. And don't forget, you can take action for transit and infrastructure. Use Fresh Energy's easy online tool to tell your legislators to build Minnesota's clean energy future. Visit fresh-energy.org and just click Take Action in the upper corner. And beyond that, I hope you'll join us for our annual webinar series Thursdays in July. We're calling this year Energy Plus, and we'll be chatting with special guests about how energy and climate issues play out across our society in books and film, institutions of higher learning, our democracy, and the very air we breathe. Register at fresh-energy.org/energy-plus. Thank you for listening.